Arjun Malhotra was a respected Indian pilot trusted with hundreds of lives every day, while Rika Kapoor was a confident flight attendant chasing dreams across international skies, and neither imagined that their secret connection spanning 3 countries would end in exposure, collapse, and a murder that shocked the aviation world. Arjun Malhotra's life appeared flawless to anyone who looked at it from the outside. At 40,000 feet above the ground, he sat in the cockpit of a commercial aircraft, calm and focused, trusted with hundreds of lives on every flight. His uniform was always pressed, his logbooks clean, and his record free of serious incidents. In his hometown in India, neighbors admired him as a man who had achieved what many only dreamed of: a stable marriage, a respected job, and the confidence of someone who seemed to have everything under control made him the picture of success. At home, Arjun followed routines that made his life appear steady and predictable. He left for work on time, returned with gifts from abroad, and spoke often about long flights and jet lag. His wife believed she understood the demands of his career and accepted his frequent absences as part of the price of being married to a pilot. Family gatherings were planned around his schedule, and apologies for missed events were always explained by last-minute duty changes. Nothing about his behavior seemed suspicious, because everything fit perfectly into the story of a busy international professional. What few people realized was that Arjun's life was carefully divided into compartments, much like the aircraft he flew. Each trip came with a different version of himself. He carried multiple phones, each used for a specific purpose, and none of them ever crossed into the wrong space. One stayed at home, filled with family photos and routine messages. Another remained hidden in his travel bag, switched on only when he landed in certain cities. Even his email accounts were separated, each linked to a different identity shaped by geography and time zones. Airports gave Arjun something most people never experience: anonymity. Among thousands of travelers rushing through terminals, he was just another uniformed pilot moving confidently through security. No one questioned where he went after clocking out, and no one expected consistency from someone whose life was spent crossing borders. Hotels became temporary homes where rules felt flexible and responsibilities distant. In these spaces, he felt free from the expectations that defined his life back in India. With every successful flight, the risk grew, but so did his confidence. Managing lies became part of his routine, as familiar as pre-flight checks and landing procedures. He learned how to adjust his tone depending on who he was speaking to, and how to remember which details belonged to which version of his life. Small mistakes were corrected quickly, and close calls were brushed off as luck. Over time, deception stopped feeling dangerous and began to feel necessary. Yet beneath the calm exterior, pressure quietly built. Maintaining control required constant attention, and the fear of exposure never fully disappeared. There were moments during long flights when his thoughts drifted, not to the instruments in front of him, but to unanswered messages and upcoming layovers. Sleep became restless, and silence often felt louder than noise. Still, he convinced himself that as long as he stayed careful, nothing could go wrong. Arjun believed the sky protected him. The distance between countries made his secrets feel safer, as if borders could separate truth from lies. He underestimated how fragile his arrangement truly was and how quickly one mistake could unravel everything. The higher he climbed in his career, the deeper he sank into deception. What began as a private escape slowly turned into a trap of his own making, waiting for the moment when gravity would finally pull everything back down. Rika Kapoor entered Arjun Malhotra's life during a routine international rotation, when long hours and shared exhaustion created a sense of closeness that felt natural. She was a flight attendant known for her professionalism and confidence, someone who adapted easily to new cities and changing schedules. Her career had taught her independence, and travel had shaped her expectations of people. When Arjun showed interest, it appeared genuine and grounded in shared experience rather than fleeting attraction. Their connection developed slowly across repeated routes. Airports, crew lounges, and layovers became familiar meeting points where time felt suspended. In these neutral spaces, Arjun presented himself as unattached, focused on work and cautious about privacy. Rhee accepted this without suspicion, assuming it was a personal choice shaped by a demanding career. The absence of clear personal history did not feel unusual in an industry where many avoided long-term commitments. As months passed, their relationship stretched across borders. In India, it felt restrained and careful. In Thailand, it became relaxed and open, hidden among tourists and unfamiliar streets. In the UAE, it took on a polished appearance, shaped by luxury hotels and brief moments of escape. Each country seemed to bring out a different side of Arjun, yet none of these versions raised immediate concern. Rhee believed she was seeing growth, not inconsistency. Arjun managed every detail with precision. Travel dates were aligned, excuses prepared, and routines adjusted to avoid overlap. He insisted on limited social media presence and avoided public photos, explaining it as protection from airline scrutiny. Rhee, mindful of company rules herself, saw this as responsible behavior. Trust grew, built not on transparency, but on repetition and routine. Over time, emotional investment deepened. Rhee began to imagine a future that extended beyond layovers and return flights. Subtle questions about long-term plans were met with vague but reassuring answers. Arjun spoke about timing, career transitions, and the need for patience. His responses felt reasonable, even thoughtful. The delays never seemed like avoidance, only caution. Small inconsistencies began to surface quietly. Certain dates were always unavailable. Calls were sometimes cut short without explanation. Messages went unanswered for hours during periods when Arjun was supposedly resting. Rhee noticed these patterns but dismissed them as the realities of aviation life. Fatigue and irregular schedules explained almost everything, or so she believed. The first real doubt appeared during a routine administrative process related to international documentation. While reviewing shared travel details, Rhee came across information that did not align with what she had been told. At first, it seemed like a clerical error. The aviation industry was full of complex records and outdated files. Still, the discovery lingered in her thoughts, creating unease she could not ignore. As she quietly searched for clarity, more fragments emerged. Old records, overlooked details, and subtle clues began forming a picture that felt increasingly unsettling. The man she trusted appeared to exist in multiple versions, none of them fully complete. The sense of intimacy she felt now seemed carefully controlled, shaped by boundaries she had never been allowed to cross. The realization came not as a single moment, but as a slow collapse of belief. What Rhee thought was privacy now felt like concealment. What she believed was caution now appeared calculated. The relationship that once felt exciting and sincere began to feel fragile, balanced on secrets she was never meant to uncover. By the time certainty replaced doubt, the emotional damage was already done. The trust she had given freely now turned into a source of anger and confusion. The connection that crossed 3 countries was built on uneven truth, and once exposed, it carried consequences far beyond heartbreak. What began as a private relationship was moving toward a public reckoning, and neither of them could control what would follow. The truth did not explode all at once. It leaked out slowly, spreading through digital traces and quiet discoveries that could no longer be ignored. Once Rhee understood that Arjun's life was not just private but deliberately hidden, her focus shifted from confusion to clarity. The more she looked, the more patterns appeared. Dates, locations, and records that once seemed harmless now formed a clear outline of deception. The image of a single, unattached pilot collapsed into something far more disturbing. What made the exposure unavoidable was how ordinary it began. A routine verification process connected to international travel requirements revealed a status that contradicted everything Arjun had presented. At first, it felt unreal, as if the information belonged to someone else with the same name, but confirmations followed quickly. Official records did not lie, and the truth sat plainly in front of her, stripped of excuses and explanations. Rhee's reaction was not immediate or reckless. She spent days revisiting past moments, rereading messages, and recalling details she had once dismissed. Every memory shifted meaning. Promises now felt strategic. Absences felt planned. The relationship no longer seemed built on affection but on control. What hurt most was not just the lie, but how long it had been maintained without hesitation. The exposure did not stay private for long. Digital evidence has a way of traveling faster than intention. Information began to reach places Arjun could not contain. Anonymous messages were sent to airline authorities, not as emotional retaliation, but as factual reports supported by documents and timelines. Internal systems flagged irregularities. Compliance teams noticed patterns that no longer looked coincidental. At the same time, traces of the truth reached closer to home. Family members received unsettling information without context, forcing them to confront a reality they never suspected. The carefully maintained separation between Arjun's worlds vanished almost overnight. What he had relied on for safety, distance and silence, turned against him. The airline responded swiftly. Pending reviews turned into formal investigations. Arjun's flight schedule was suspended, and access to certain systems was restricted. Colleagues who once trusted him began to look at him differently, not with anger but with disbelief. The industry valued discipline and accountability, and his actions violated both. The fall from respect was sudden and public. For Arjun, the pressure became overwhelming. His controlled routine collapsed, replaced by constant fear. Every notification felt like a threat. Every delay felt dangerous. The life he had built on precision and timing now moved beyond his control. He could no longer decide which version of himself to present, because all of them were exposed at once. Meanwhile, faced a different kind of storm. The exposure brought scrutiny she never expected. Private pain became public speculation. Her professional environment shifted and trust from peers grew fragile. Though she had acted to reveal the truth, the consequences followed her closely. What she believed would bring closure instead pulled her deeper into chaos. The situation escalated quickly. Financial stress, professional collapse, and personal shame closed in around Arjun. The options he once believed, he had disappeared one by one. The lies that once protected him now threatened to destroy everything he cared about. Desperation replaced calculation, and fear replaced logic. By the time the full weight of exposure settled, the damage was irreversible. Careers were derailed, relationships were broken, and reputations were beyond repair. What began as a hidden double life had transformed into a crisis touching multiple countries and institutions. The truth was no longer something that could be managed or negotiated. It had become a force moving toward a violent and tragic conclusion. The final meeting was not planned far in advance, but it felt inevitable given how quickly events were spiraling. Travel records later showed that both of them were in the same city during a short international layover, a coincidence that now appeared deliberate. The rented apartment was chosen for privacy, tucked away from busy hotels and familiar routes. It was meant to be temporary, unnoticed, and easy to leave behind. Inside that confined space, the tension that had been building for months reached its peak. Investigators later pieced together the timeline through digital data, access logs, and nearby surveillance cameras. What was clear was that the situation escalated rapidly. There was no evidence of careful planning, only signs of emotional overload and loss of control. Objects were displaced, furniture damaged, and the room showed evidence of a struggle that had grown violent in a short span of time. Ree's body was discovered the following morning by building staff responding to concerns raised by neighbors. The scene indicated panic rather than intention. Forensic reports later confirmed blunt force trauma as the cause of death, consistent with an outburst rather than a premeditated act. The apartment told a story of chaos, not calculation. Whatever happened inside unfolded faster than either of them could stop. Arjun was gone by the time authorities arrived. Security footage captured him leaving the building alone, his movements rushed and unsteady. For several hours, his location remained unknown. During that window, Phone activity showed attempts to erase data, cancel bookings, and secure immediate travel. The man who once managed schedules with precision was now acting on pure instinct. Law enforcement moved quickly. Airports, hotels, and transport hubs were alerted. His profession, once a shield, now made him easier to track. Pilots left clear digital footprints, and his attempt to blend into international transit failed. He was detained at a nearby airport while trying to leave the country, carrying minimal belongings and documents that raised immediate suspicion. During interrogation, the weight of the situation became undeniable. Evidence stacked quickly, leaving little room for denial. Surveillance footage, forensic findings, and digital records formed a complete narrative. The collapse of his double life had reached its darkest point, transforming personal fear into irreversible violence. The crime shocked those who had known both individuals professionally. Colleagues struggled to reconcile the controlled pilot with the act he was now accused of committing. Industry experts noted how stress, secrecy, and unchecked pressure can distort judgment when accountability disappears. What made the case unsettling was how ordinary it seemed on the surface. There were no warning signs that clearly predicted such an outcome. Rhee's death sent ripples across multiple countries. Media coverage intensified, focusing on the contrast between glamour and tragedy. Public attention shifted from scandal to loss of life, reframing the narrative entirely. What was once seen as an affair now stood exposed as a story of manipulation, fear, and fatal consequences. For Arjun, the reality of his actions settled in during custody. The escape he attempted only deepened the evidence against him. The uniform, the status, and the authority he once carried offered no protection anymore. The controlled environment he relied on had vanished, replaced by confinement and scrutiny. That single night marked the point of no return. The lies that had crossed borders ended in one room under circumstances that could never be undone. What followed would not only determine Arjun's fate, but would permanently define how his life and Rhee's would be remembered. The legal process moved quickly once the investigation concluded. The evidence left little room for interpretation, and the case did not rely on speculation or hidden details. Digital records, forensic reports, and travel data connected every stage of the events leading up to the crime. Arjun Malhotra's confession, delivered after prolonged questioning, removed any remaining doubt about responsibility. What began as denial slowly shifted into admission when the weight of proof became impossible to escape. The court proceedings attracted widespread attention. Media outlets followed each development closely, focusing on the contrast between Arjun's former image and the reality now revealed. The calm, disciplined pilot once trusted with passenger safety was now presented as someone who had lived a carefully managed lie for years. The prosecution outlined how fear of exposure, professional collapse, and personal shame had driven him toward a final act of violence. The defense offered no alternative version that could change the outcome. When the sentence was delivered, it marked a definitive end to Arjun's previous life. Life imprisonment closed the door on any future in aviation, travel, or public respect. The courtroom atmosphere reflected a sense of finality rather than surprise. Those following the case had already witnessed the complete unraveling of his double life. The verdict only confirmed what the evidence had shown from the beginning. For Arjun's family, the aftermath was deeply painful. They faced public scrutiny, social isolation, and the loss of the life they once knew. Trust had been shattered not only by the crime but by the years of deception that preceded it. The consequences extended far beyond the individual who committed the act, affecting relatives who had no part in his choices. Rhee Kapoor's story became central to the public conversation. Investigators and journalists shifted focus from scandal to accountability and loss. She was remembered as a dedicated professional whose ambition and trust were exploited. Memorials and internal airline discussions emphasized the importance of ethical conduct and personal boundaries within high-pressure industries. Her death was no longer just a detail in a crime story, but a reminder of the human cost behind hidden relationships. The aviation industry responded with internal reviews and renewed attention to mental health and professional oversight. While regulations already existed, the case highlighted how personal misconduct could escalate when unchecked by transparency. Training programs began addressing emotional stress, secrecy, and accountability, aiming to prevent similar situations in the future. The tragedy became a case study discussed in professional circles worldwide. Public reaction evolved over time. Initial fascination with the scandal faded, replaced by reflection and unease. Viewers and readers questioned how easily appearances could hide dangerous realities. The story challenged the belief that success and discipline always reflect inner stability. It exposed how control, when built on lies, can collapse violently. In prison, Arjun's life became defined by routine of a different kind. The precision that once governed flight schedules was replaced by confinement and silence. There was no escape, no alternate identity, and no audience to impress. The consequences of his actions followed him daily, stripped of the privileges that once separated him from ordinary accountability. The case left behind a lasting lesson. What appeared to be a glamorous international romance was, in truth, a fragile construction held together by secrecy. When the truth emerged, it destroyed careers, families, and lives. The story remains a stark reminder that deception does not disappear with distance, and that living multiple lives often leads to a single, devastating end.